All right, good afternoon. Let me start off with a couple of updates. I will start off with Gaza, then with Lebanon. We are aware of very disturbing reports about an Israeli attack on the grounds of a hospital complex in central Gaza. The Secretary General condemns a large number of civilian casualties in the intensifying Israeli campaign in northern Gaza, including its schools displacing sheltered Palestinian civilians. He strongly urges the parties to the conflict, all parties to the conflict, to comply with international humanitarian law and emphasizes that civilians must be respected and protected at all times. Humanitarian assistance into Gaza is woefully inadequate and is at the lowest level in months. The Secretary General underscores that the parties must ensure the safe and secure delivery of humanitarian assistance to those in need at the level at which they need it. There must be safe environment as well for the second phase of the polio vaccination campaign, which is to be completed, and I'll have a bit more details on polio in a moment. Today, a team from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, alongside with colleagues from the World Health Organization and the UN Mine Action Service and the UN Human Rights Office, visited the Al-Aqsa Hospital in Gaza to assess people's needs following last night's attack. The Al-Aqsa Hospital was also meant to be used as one of the polio vaccination sites. Out of the hundreds of displaced families sheltering in the courtyard, some 40 families were affected, half of whom lost their children and other belongings in the fire. Aid organizations are mobilizing the humanitarian response. Among the assistance most urgently needed are tents and tarpaulins, beddings, hygiene kits, clothing, children's supplies, kitchen kits, as well as food. The assessment noted that patients at Al-Aqsa Hospital were referred to nearby medical facilities due to influx of trauma injuries following a strike on UNRWA's school in Nuseirat. Despite all of this, the second round of the polio vaccination campaign began in the middle area of the Gaza Strip today. Over the coming 12 days, colleagues at UNRWA, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and others aim to vaccinate around 590,000 children under 10 years of age with a second dose of the the oral polio vaccination type 2. This follows the first round, as you will recall, which was successfully implemented from the 1st to the 12th of September, which reached more than 559,000 children, or an estimated 95% of the eligible children at governorate level. That's according to independently conducted post-campaign monitoring. As with the first round, the second round will have three phases, each involving 3 campaign days and one catch-up day. The polio vaccination campaign began, as I mentioned, UNRWA renews its urgent request to all parties in this conflict to implement the necessary humanitarian pauses in Gaza for the second round of vaccination campaign to be successful. Meanwhile, the World Food Programme today warned that escalating violence in northern Gaza is having a disastrous impact on food security for thousands of Palestinian families. WFP says the main crossings into the north have now been closed with no food aid entering since October 1st. Food distribution points as well as kitchen and bakeries in northern Gaza have been forced to shut down due to airstrikes, military ground operations, and evacuation orders. Last of the World Food Programme supplies in the north, that includes canned food, wheat flour, high-energy biscuits, and nutrition supplements, have been distributed to shelters, health facilities, and kitchens in Gaza cities and 3 shelters in northern Gaza. If the conflict continues to escalate at the current scale, it is unclear how long these limited food supplies will last, and the consequences for fleeing families will obviously be dire. Turning north to the situation in Lebanon, I can tell you that the Secretary General has been in very frequent contact with the force commander of UNIFIL, the UN peacekeeping mission, and that's General Alrodo Lazzaro. The Secretary General is extremely appreciative of the courage and dedication of the more than 10,000 uniformed and civilian peacekeepers serving in the mission. Our UNIFIL colleagues continue to monitor the situation. On Sunday, the mission detected 1,557 instances of firing across the Blue Line. That's the highest number in one day since October 8th, 2023. 1,441 of these originated from south of the Blue Line, primarily striking areas in Sector East of the UNIFIL area of operations. There were 116 instances of firing from north of the Blue Line into Israel, with Hezbollah drones striking near Haifa, reportedly killing 4 IDF soldiers and injuring several others. Over 30 people have been killed in southern Lebanon since October 10th. UNIFIL continuously assesses and reviews all factors to determine its own posture and its own presence at its positions across the Blue Line. The mission is taking all possible measures to ensure the protection of its peacekeepers. UNIFIL's roles and its presence in southern Lebanon, as you know very well, is mandated by the UN Security Council. In this context, UNIFIL is committed to preserving its capacity to support diplomatic solution based on Security Council Resolution 1701, which, as far as we are concerned, is the only way forward. You saw over the weekend a series of events happening along the Blue Line in which our peacekeeping mission positions were impacted and some of the peacekeepers were hurt. UNIFIL colleagues had said that since October 1st, UNIFIL positions have been impacted on 20 occasions, including by direct fire, and on one occasion breached by 2 tanks from the IDF. To address these issues, among others, the head of our peacekeeping department, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, will be briefing the Security Council later this afternoon in close consultations, and he's expected to underscore a concern with respect to the continuing exchange of fire across the Blue Line, as well as the repeated impacts on UNIFIL positions in recent days. 5 peacekeepers have been injured during these recent incidents, including 1 peacekeeper who sustained a bullet wound. The peacekeepers have been treated and are in stable condition. The source of that gunfire has yet to be confirmed by UNIFIL. You will have seen various statements issued by UNIFIL this weekend, and also a statement issued on Sunday on behalf of the Secretary General, in which he reiterated that UNIFIL's personnel and its premises must never be targeted. Attacks against peacekeepers are in breach of international law, including international humanitarian law, and they may constitute war crime. He called on all parties, including the IDF, to refrain from any and all actions that put our peacekeepers at risk. On the humanitarian front, we and our partners continue to support the response in Lebanon, despite increasing challenges, including insecurity and displacement orders, which have forced some of our partners to reduce operations in south of the country. Humanitarian organizations continue to deliver food, water, and medicine, along with mattress, blankets, sleeping mats, and other essential supplies to those in need. Health partners are also active in shelters and delivering primary health care consultations. This comes as more than 1 million people have already been displaced, both within Lebanon and to other countries, with that number expected to rise as hostilities continue. The situation is worsening, and our humanitarian colleagues from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us that Lebanon is now in the midst of its most devastating humanitarian crisis in a generation, with civilians continuing to bear the brunt of the ongoing violence, with more than 2,200 deaths and over 10,000 people injured so far reported by Lebanese authorities to us. Health facilities were also heavily impacted. WHO reports that out of 207 primary health care centers in the conflict area in Lebanon, 100 have now been shut down, severely limiting access to much needed health care in this time. 5 hospitals have also been closed due to structural damage from ongoing attacks, further straining an already overstretched healthcare system. The violence has resulted in the deaths of 94 healthcare workers while on duty and the destruction, as mentioned, of vital facilities. To add to the current challenges, WHO and its partners are warning now that the rapid displacement and shortage of clean water in the country over the recent weeks is increasing the risk of spread of infectious disease in overcrowded shelters, especially ahead of winter. Many displaced people also lack medication and other needed supplies. We repeat once again that parties to the conflict must take all feasible precautions to avoid and minimize harms to civilians and to civilian objects, both in attacks and against the effect of attacks. Turning to Yemen, you will have seen over the weekend a joint statement in which was issued by a number of heads of UN entities and non-governmental organizations concerning the arbitrarily detained personnel in Yemen. In the statement, they expressed their extreme concern about the reported referral to what's called a, quote, criminal prosecution by the Houthi de facto authorities of a significant number of our arbitrarily detained personnel. That includes 2 of our colleagues from UNESCO and 1 from the UN Human Rights Office. And they've been detained, those were detained in 2021 and last year. The heads of UN agencies underscored that the potential laying of, quote, charges against our colleagues is unacceptable and further compounds the lengthy incommunicado detention they have already endured for way too long. In addition, such a decision raises further serious concerns about the safety and security of our staff and their families, and will further impede our ability to reach millions of Yemenis who so desperately need humanitarian aid as well as protection. And just as a reminder that we and our partners are working through all possible channels with multiple governments to secure the immediate release of all those detained. And as we speak now, UNHCR is delivering its Nansen Refugee Award. That's going on in Geneva this year. The global laureate is Sister Rosita Milesi, a Brazilian nun and social activist. In a post on Twitter, the Secretary General congratulated Sister Rosita for receiving the award. For over 40 years, he said she has been shown to be an unwavering support of refugees and migrants, and in a world that can so often seem bleak, she's a beacon of hope for all those who are forced to flee. 4 other trailblazing women are also being honored this year for their regional work with refugees and displaced women and children. They're Maimouna Ba, who is a grassroots activist from Burkina Faso, Jin Davod, a young social entrepreneur who's helped Syrian refugees, Deepti Gurung, a Nepali activist who campaigned to reform her country's citizenship laws, and finally Nada Fadol, a Sudanese refugee who's been mobilized essential aid for humanitarian for hundreds of families fleeing to Egypt in search of safety. The UNHCR Nansen Award honors individuals, groups, and organizations who go above and beyond the call of duty to protect refugees and stateless people. We congratulate them all. Edie, I see you with a mic in hand, which I assume means you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Steph. On aid in northern Gaza, does the UN have any figure on how many of the 400,000 Palestinians remaining in the north are actually getting any aid?
Very few, but I will try to get you a more precise number.
And following up on that, does the Secretary General have any comment on this proposal that Prime Minister Netanyahu is considering from a group of Israeli generals to evacuate northern Gaza and deny any aid going into the north to try and get rid of all
I think
the remaining Hamas.
We clearly stand against any such action. Gabriel.
Steph, in regard to the Israeli attack of Al-Aqsa Hospital, or the tents that were around Al-Aqsa Hospital, it's the 7th time that the perimeter of Al-Aqsa Hospital has been attacked. As the Secretary General probably saw, people were burned alive. It seems like this is a little bit more than just simply disturbing. Does the Secretary General have any more reaction to this?
Well, I mean, I think I read his reaction at the beginning, which clearly condemned the attack. It is yet another round of horror in this conflict. The Palestinian civilians continue to suffer. the more than 100 hostages continue to be held in tunnels and not see their freedom. And this is why we continue, even at this time, to call for a ceasefire. Michelle.
Thank you, Steph. Question on Lebanon. Last week, I think it was Thursday, when Mr. Lacroix briefed the council and he laid out all the attacks on peacekeepers by Israel, mentioning that they targeted cameras, the watchtower, lighting. What does the UN assess as Israel's intention with these attacks?
We can't, listen, assessing their intention is you should ask the Israelis. We can only talk about the impact that it has and report dutifully what is happening on the ground.
And then, there's about 10,000 peacekeepers, I think, on the ground there, but they do have a ceiling of 15,000. Are there any discussions about beefing up the number on the ground?
About beefing up number on the ground? No, not that I'm aware of. Benny.
Actually, two questions about UNIFIL, and the first one is
Can
the
you put your
opposite.
microphone a little closer?
Actually,
Yeah.
two questions about UNIFIL, and the first one is the opposite of what Michelle asked. Is there any consideration? I understand that this is a Security Council issue, but is there, because of all the incidents, is there any consideration by the Secretary General or Lacroix or whoever to reduce or even remove all UNIFIL from battlefield areas? My second question is actually to beef up on the first question. Sorry about that. One of the incidents you mentioned with the tanks, according to the IDF, the tanks came under intense fire. They tried to back up and accidentally hit that wall. So what I'm trying to say is this is a combat zone. There's going to be a lot of trouble. Is the UN, which is currently not doing much, I must say, in southern Lebanon, is it worth it for the UNIFIL to be
Listen, we have a mandate from the Security Council, right? We continue to implement that mandate. I can tell you, and I heard this from General Lazzaro himself not a few minutes ago, that they are continuously assessing and reviewing all factors which determines the posture and the presence of UNIFIL along the blue line. Right now, they are remaining in their position, remaining to implement their mandate, reporting on what they are seeing.
And second question that has to do with that, you say you have a mandate from the Security Council. Part of that mandate is to ensure that there's no armed militias south of the Litani or 1559, no armed militias at all. And the question is, yesterday there were clear documentation of an attack tunnel that was dug right 100 meters away from a UNIFIL position. There are tons of those kinds of, so the UNIFIL has failed to fill the mandate for the last 18 years.
It'll come as no surprise to you that I may not agree with your conclusion, Benny. I think 1701 calls on the parties. The Lebanese government has its share of responsibilities, Lebanese armed forces, and a lot of actors, including Israel, all have their responsibilities in 1701. As far as I'm concerned, UNIFIL continues to implement its mandate.
Steph, 1701, at that tunnel and another area in which rockets were fired in northern Israel were found right next to UNIFIL position. That tunnel was built probably for months or years with a lot of bulldozers. Is there any way the UNIFIL missed that activity?
I think what the last year has shown us that a lot of people have been unaware of things that may have been built. Sirife.
Thank you. Stéphane, I want to go back to Israel's intensification of attacks in northern Gaza. It is reported that due to these attacks, 487 civilians have been killed just in the last 10 days, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. I mean, we saw an image with someone burning to death while getting an IV transfusion. Surely this should evoke stronger reactions. I mean, do you think is it really sufficient for the Secretary General to just condemn and call on both sides? I mean, does he have a more concrete call to the international community and Israel in this case?
I think the Secretary General's calls have been clear. He and his team have been continuously pushing for an end to this conflict, for a cessation of hostilities, for a ceasefire, for more humanitarian aid to be going in, for hostages to be released. I think he's been relentless in all of that. Nabil, and then Dulcie.
So the Security Council will discuss.
A little, yeah.
Sorry, the Security Council will discuss UNIFIL this afternoon. Do you expect Mr. Lacroix to speak to us after or before the meeting? And what does the Secretary General expect or maybe hope that the Security Council can do to protect UNIFIL and support UNIFIL?
I think any fully unified voice from the Security Council in defense of UNIFIL would be appreciated. I think that all members of the Security Council who may have an influence on the parties involved in this conflict to move them away from conflict and back to political discussion would also be appreciated. Dulcie. Yeah. Lacroix will ask. Michelle, we will just put in whatever you'd like as a request. I know you always speak for everyone, Michelle. Dulcie.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that UNIFIL injured peacekeepers number is 6 total. Is it because there have been a lot of
whatever I said, hopefully earlier a few minutes ago,
Did you say 6?
which I don't remember, and maybe you don't remember either. What did I say? I said 5.
5. Okay, so the nationalities are Indonesian and Sri Lankan, and what is the 5th?
I do not have that information. Sometimes that's not given until their families have been made aware of the situation.
Okay, and one other question about Sigrid Kaag. Is she still the senior humanitarian aid coordinator?
Yes, ma'am, she is.
Yeah,
Yes.
Until when? I lost track.
Until her mandate expires. I don't have the exact date, but she is currently, I know, in Jerusalem having meetings, so she's fully at work. Stefano.
Thank you, Stéphane. 2 things about UNIFIL. When the Secretary General yesterday he released a message, did he release this message before or after Premier Netanyahu spoke and asking him to move?
Well, I mean, I think the statement from the Prime Minister was public. The Secretary General's statement was public, and if you look at the release time, you will see for yourself that it was after.
I will check.
Yeah, I was busy on Sunday too. Yeah.
Well, okay. Then about the rule of engagement of those blue helmets there. Today, the Turkish president said that the image of the UN not even managing to defend its forces is a source of shame and concern for the international system. I think he implies that the UN peacekeeper should have acted when there was this aggressive move. So can you tell me that? Just let me finish. And only with Israeli. For example, if those soldiers see Hezbollah 100 meters, 200 meters shooting at Israel, what are the rules of engagement? Can they intervene?
I mean, you should look at the rules of engagement. The peacekeepers are not there to engage militarily with the parties. They can obviously defend themselves. And I can tell you that the actions of the peacekeepers, especially the last few days, is not a source of shame for the United Nations. It is a source of pride. Yes, ma'am. Your microphone's not on. Sorry.
Inam Dahan, how are you? Quick question about Plan B. Is United Nations or the UNIFIL are prepared for any civil war, especially knowing that Hezbollah now is using schools and they are well equipped? Is there any Plan B, any preparation for civil war?
I don't know what you mean by Plan B. There's
Because we understand that UNIFIL now is protecting some areas. What about if anything happened in the middle of the...
No, UNIFIL does not have a mandate to operate in every part of Lebanon. It has a mandate to operate along the Blue Line. That's where the authority they've been given by the Security Council. So unless that mandate changes, that's where they will continue to operate. Madam.
Thank you. I also want to ask about the recent horrific crime by the Israeli occupation where individuals were burned alive in their tents. The Israeli army spokespersons released an admission of this crime, with the excuse always being the targeting of fighters. How do you receive such justification for the crime and the continuous media distortion by the occupation?
Look, we are reacting to the facts on the ground as we see them, as they're told to us, as our colleagues see them. We're not operating and commenting on anything else. Hold on. Let me go to the screen first, and I'll come back to the room. I think Mike, you had a question.
I did, sir, and you answered half of it. I had asked this question last week and was referred to statements by the Secretary General and Undersecretary Lacroix, and neither one of them were relevant to the question, so I'll ask it again. You said that the actions of UNIFIL over the past weekend are a source of pride for the UN, which is fine. Where's that pride been for the last umpteen years? Because now, all of a sudden, UNIFIL is willing to step up and step in the path of potential violence and potential death. For years, and it's obvious by what's been found on the ground in southern Lebanon, they walked away every single time there was a potential conflict with Hamas. And when the choice came between fulfilling their mandate and protecting themselves, and it's not a judgment, it's just fact and it's policy, they chose to protect themselves. So now that there's a sense of pride about what they've been doing lately vis-a-vis the IDF, is that to say there's a sense of shame for what they've not been doing?
No, I don't think, and I think you were referring to Hezbollah, not Hamas.
Hezbollah, I'm so used to talking about Hamas.
I understand, Mike. I think over the years, UNIFIL peacekeepers, including, as you'll recall, Private Sean Rooney, have paid for their life in different circumstances. We continue to be proud of what UNIFIL has done. And as a reminder, that resolution, the implementation of Resolution 1701 falls in the hands of many parties, political parties and national parties.
Is there a change in policy, though? Because if not written, the de facto policy was protect yourselves. If the choice is between serving the mandate and
they're continuing. We are continuing also to be focused on force protection. Just decisions are made on their presence and their posture on an hourly basis. The situation currently is what it is, but those reviews are being made all the time.
One more question for you on the polio.
Yes, please.
Polio campaign.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was one of the few successes so far in terms of Israel and international cooperation in Gaza. Are there any specific challenges that you guys are looking at right now, other than the obvious? I mean, from a logistical standpoint, from a cooperation standpoint, are there any specific challenges?
I mean, I don't know what the challenges are beyond the obvious one that we're trying to run a polio campaign in the midst of a war zone. But you're right. the campaign in September was a bright spot in what the parties to the conflict could agree to, what the UN was able to do through negotiations, notably with the Israeli government. We were able to vaccinate 559,000 children. We very much hope the second phase will be as successful. We see that the bare minimum, which is agreeing for all who are fighting to agree on vaccinating children under 10 against polio, is possible. Maybe more can grow out of it. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Steph. I was the first to enter my name for a question.
Iftikhar, I apologize. I have to pay attention to what's going on in the room, my phone, and as I tell my wife often, I'm a man, I can only do one thing at a time. So please accept my apologies.
No problem. First, there is a report in the New York Times today that Israeli soldiers are using Palestinian youth who are handcuffed to go into threatening situations and act as human shields. Do you have any information about this?
No,
if so,
I do not have any information.
And secondly, there is a conference, there's a Shanghai Security Organization conference going on in Islamabad. Who is representing the United Nations?
A very valid question. I will find out. Gabriel, and then I'm going to call it quits.
Okay, Steph, just a couple of follow-ups. COGAT is saying 30 trucks entered through the Erez crossing today. Can you confirm that or not?
Again, this is trucks that are able to get into Erez, into the crossing. I have no doubt that it is true. The challenge for us, and it continues, and it's getting worse, is due to the insecurity, the lack of law in order, is to pick up those goods.
And just to make sure I understood something on Lebanon correctly, there were 1,557 violations across the blue line on yesterday, and 1,441 came from the south to the north.
Correct, and there was hopefully it's the balance, if we did our math right, came the other way.
92% came from the south to the north. You don't have to answer that, but I did the math. So 92% came from Israel. For
that particular day.
That particular day. And one last follow-up, Steph, if you allow me, please, thanks, is many people in Gaza, and I don't speak for them, but we have journalists and humanitarians that are there that do speak to them, are growing increasingly frustrated with the UN. And I know the UN is multiple things, but especially after this weekend and after the last 2 weeks, people being starved in the north, people being burned alive in the middle section of the in Deir al-Balah. You know the whole thing here. So a doctor.
What's the question, Gabriel?
Thank you. A doctor we spoke to said that people in Gaza have realized no one is coming to help them and no one is coming to save them. That was a doctor at Al-Aqsa Hospital today. What is your reaction?
I mean, I can't even begin to understand the frustration and the anger of people who are directly impacted by this conflict. But I can tell you that our humanitarian colleagues on the ground are extremely frustrated at the situation because they know they're not able to do what they need to do to help all the people they need to help. I mean, we had a team go to Al-Aqsa Hospital today, right? WHO, Mine Action Service, OCHA. But as we've said, all of this is a drop in the bucket. All of this is humanitarian assistance through opportunity instead of large-scale assistance that we want. So we fully understand their frustration, and we're as frustrated as well because in this conflict and in other conflicts, whether it's in Sudan, we know there are so many people who need help. But because this conflict is going on, because fighting is ongoing, we're not able to reach the people that we want to reach. Thank you. See you tomorrow. We'll let you know about Mr. Lacroix.